We're joined now by Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren. Kevin, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really nice for Christy and I to get a chance to talk to you. And I want to begin by asking you a pretty broad question, and that's what qualities do you think that a pioneer must possess?
Qualities, that's a great question. I would probably say toughness, grit, integrity, vision, wisdom, short memory, and gratitude.
How did those qualities evolve in you, and how did your parents plant those kinds of quality seeds in you as a young man?
I feel many days, Christy, I have an unfair advantage in life because I was blessed to be born into a household with two parents who were very tough, who really had their own story to share, but never complained. And they demanded excellence from an academic standpoint. Athletics was, a nice gift to be able to play. But, and I was the youngest of 7 kids. So my oldest brother, Morrison, was the first scholarship football player at Stanford in 1961. He's 20 years older than me, but to be able to see him set the tone as the children in our family. So by the time I came along, it was just understood that not only were you going to go to college, but you were going to be a student athlete. You were going to get at least 1 advanced degree, maybe 2, and you were never going to complain. And you were going to set the tone for the future generations to come. And to put it into context, I have to share this with my children, is when my brother Morrison, first Black scholarship football player at Stanford in the early 60s, when he went to Palo Alto, he took the Greyhound bus from Phoenix. And so when you think about taking a 14-hour bus ride on a Greyhound bus from Phoenix, to Stanford, that's really epitomizes, leadership qualities, which I was raised around. And then the other thing, a little bit shy of my 11th birthday, I was in that severe car accident and ended up breaking my femur and other bones. But to spend many, many weeks in a hospital in traction, and then many weeks in a full body cast that went all the way up to the top of my chest and down all the way to my right toe and halfway down my left leg. So when I hear people say, they've been knocked flat on their back, I actually lived that way for a long period of time. So I think those are the qualities that my parents made sure that we all grew up with in our household, but especially, me, and just to always push forward, but do it in a way that epitomizes kind of style and grace and class, and never ever, ever complain about anything.
Let's revisit that experience that you had right before you turned 11 years old, that accident where you were flat on your back, literally and figuratively. When you go back to the perseverance that it took to overcome that, and the usage of the pool in your backyard that you helped put together, take us back to that kind of mentality for you as the youngest sibling in the house, but to have that kind of fortitude to push through and the resilience necessary to succeed.
One of the great things about the human species is the survival instincts. And because I was forced, before I even knew what survival meant, I was forced as a young boy to survive. And so by going through that experience and having to deal with all of the, the physical pain and torment, the mental and emotional pain and torment, the concern about what would my life be, would I ever walk again, is that when survival has a very unique way of pushing you to points in your life that you never would go through in normal, comfortable circumstances. But once you've gone there, just like you've been a student athlete, once you're a student athlete and you've gone to the point of exhaustion and say, you know what, I really didn't pass out. So I'm okay. I mean, so once you go to a certain point, you understand how much more you have to give. It was interesting growing up in my household. My mom would come off the rails when you would say, "Boy, I'm starving," and she would say, "You're not starving, because she would give an example of her because she grew up poor. She says, I've gone to bed hungry. I know what the feeling of starvation means. So don't say that word. You can say I'm hungry, but don't say I'm starving. And so I truly got a chance to understand how far we can go, our physical grit, how far our mental capabilities to go because of the accident. And so that's why I feel I wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation with you, but for that accident, because it allowed me to go to places that most people don't have an opportunity. And I say most people aren't blessed to be able to deal with severe emotional, physical pain. But once I did that, every time that I thought I was really tired, that I would go back to that spot to say, no, I have a lot more to go. And so I'm grateful now. And as I look back many, many years ago, but I'm grateful for that accident because I think it not only saved my life in a unique way, but it really has empowered me to continually push forward.
Commissioner, I want to move ahead up to when you were in college, specifically when you first started out at University of Pennsylvania playing basketball there. I'm sure the experience that you had as a child with the accident paid dividends even in that regard. But what I'm most curious about is you spent the year at UPenn, then you finished your basketball career at Grand Canyon University. What was life like as a student athlete, particularly as a Black student athlete in the early 80s at an Ivy League school like that? What was life like that for you?
Again, it was back to survival. I mean, I didn't have some of the experiences that many of my classmates, I don't say teammates, but classmates had. I remember, I went to a public high school in Arizona. I worked very hard academically, but school did not come naturally to me. And so I had to study, but I hadn't traveled. I had been on a plane a few times, but I hadn't traveled outside of the country. I didn't own a passport. And when I go to Penn, and I remember the first week of class, I'm talking to some of the people in our dorm, and they're talking about these boarding schools, Choate and Andover, and they were Phillips Academy. And I literally said, what school is that? I had never heard of them. Talking about boarding school and skiing in the Alps and, traveling and being to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower. I said, those are things, because my mother was a librarian, I loved globes, that I would spin the globe, point a picture, then I'd go pull a book and read about it. But I had never been there. I didn't even know anyone who had been there. And the only person who I'd known who had been to Europe was my father in the war. And so coming into that environment, it was demanding, it was difficult. And then I also didn't know that I started college earlier because, you only know what you know. And in Arizona, they allow you to start school when you're 5. And because I'm a November birthday, my parents, went probably because I was driving them crazy around the house. So they actually started me in school early. So when I went to school, I was 17 years old. So I was not only a student athlete coming from a public school, going to an Ivy League school with a bunch of people, some of which who had perfect ACT and SAT scores, young. And so I didn't turn 18 until November 17th of my freshman year. We'd already played college, basketball games, and I didn't recognize it. Most of my teammates, for sure, the freshman class were 18 and most of them were 19. But we had some individuals on our team, some of our seniors were like near 23 years old. And so you think of that 6-year gap. But again, back from a survival standpoint, so as a 17-year-old person in a highly competitive academic school and a highly competitive, athletic program, what it did, it just brought the best, out of me. And some of those people still to this days are friends. Fran McCafferty, who's the coach at Iowa, was a senior when I was a freshman. And I thank him every time that I see him, because it was that type of leadership that I watched of watching someone watch film and work hard and all those different attributes. So that's the beauty about being a student athlete. You learn so much about life and about, race, or how people can come together. And it's important to stay together as a team, because you're a team, first and foremost.
And with that being said, you alluded to knowing what you see, and you saw a lot from your late father, the Dr. Morrison Warren Jr., and he's in the Hall of Fame at Arizona State as a football student athlete there. But What did you see in him and the representation in a leadership role when he was with the Fiesta Bowl? He was the organizer of that in 1982. What about his leadership qualities have led you down the path that you have been on?
I think one of the greatest attributes that my father either intentionally or unintentionally taught me, and because he was a teacher, I'd have to say intentionally, I never in my entire life saw him lose his cool, not one time. And I think that's one of the things that I've always tried to emulate, is to be calm, to focus on being as I call it, a thermostat and not a thermometer. So many people did have the environment around them dictate their attitudes. But my dad, and no matter what he was going through, whether it was the Fiesta Bowl formation or I remember he was a board member on a bank board that was getting sued. And my bedroom, we had a small house, was right next to a bedroom that he had converted in the office. And I remember I could hear him agonizing in there going through this, but he was always calm. I didn't even really know till I got over it. My dad was vice mayor of Phoenix in 1969. I was, 6, 7 years old before a Black man to be in that position. And he wasn't in politics. He just did that to really help. But in all of the years that I was around my father, up to the day that he died, not one time did I ever hear him raise his voice, act out of what someone would say, that he was a classy person. And so even though we had some challenging moments, even like last year, one of the things that I hope I would make my dad proud of is to make sure that I remained calm, even in dealing with a lot of complicated issues.
Commissioner, that was about to be my next question, was dealing with some of the outside noise that I know came in at times last year. How did you internalize some of that?
It's interesting. And I always, on New Year's Eve, I always think of just one thing, because so many times in life we get waylaid by trying to have too many things to do. But from a spiritual standpoint, I always focus on what is one area in my spiritual life that I want to improve upon. And interestingly enough, New Year's Eve of 2019, the one area that I said I really wanted to improve on in 2020 was my prayer life. I thought it was really good, but I knew I could get better. And that was my prayer. I didn't think that in the middle of March, COVID-19 would change our world forever. And for the first couple months, I really struggled with, what this whole COVID-19 meant. 72 days after I had just been named commissioner, provided me an opportunity from a historical perspective. I was so focused on making sure I perform to give people like myself who come behind me an opportunity for this job. So I was really lasered in. I saw 104 of our 350 teams play. I went to 3 town hall meetings. Things were going well. And then all of a sudden, COVID-19 hit. But so it took me a couple months where I was really struggling and asking why, what is this about? And then I was reminded what it was about is my prayers were really being answered. Is that because once I recognized what this whole journey in life is about spiritual growth, that's when it became easy for me to handle. And so I started to embrace all of the challenges. I started to embrace when we postponed the season. I started to embrace all of the things that people perceive that maybe were negative, that I really counted as joy, because what it did, it took me from saying my prayers, in the bed to on my knees. And literally by the end of the year, still to this day, now I do them on my hands, knees, and face throughout the day. And so as I look back from a personal standpoint, and I'm saddened every day about the number of people who've lost their lives of COVID-19 and all the turmoil that we went through in 2020 with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and so many other people who lost their lives at the hands of police officers, is that for me personally, 2020 will be a year that I look back upon that it was an inflection point of my life. And I would say the most critical years, 2 years of my life, was a year that I was hit by the car in 1974, and it'll be 2020. Because from a spiritual standpoint, I really got a chance to know God and to understand what prayer is and the answering of prayers. And when you hear all those sermons of praying without ceasing, I had heard it, but I hadn't lived it. But last year, I lived it because of all the things that we were going through as a conference, of the people, that me personally, that I really understood. And so as I look back over it, the 2 years that changed my life the most and put me on a trajectory to do great things was 1974 and 2020. And I will always carry that forward, from that standpoint. And so although there was a lot of painful days, a lot of dark days and dark nights, but the glory that came out of it, I will always be grateful for it.
Commissioner, you just preached a word right there that I think we all needed to hear. It's good to hear how you grew from some of these more difficult moments. I have one follow-up, and then I'm gonna pass it back to Christy. And just kind of preparing for this, I came across some words that a colleague of yours, who's a leadership coach, he wrote about you, and he said these words: "Good leaders make a habit of staying positive and grateful in all life situations, and they use the hardships in their lives to fuel the goodness in their endeavors." And I'm just curious to know, from your perspective, how do you think that does apply to you, not just now after what you've been through in 2020, but as a leader as a whole?
I mean, I couldn't said it any better. And I've said that before, even in my training, what Christy alluded to about when I spent some of my settlement money to build my own pool, which I wrote a book about, which will be coming out later this year. I talked about even the beauty about swimming, and I do it all the time, is, you can create enough, energy to get to the top of the water when you're halfway in the water, but you create even more energy and powerful when you go all the way down to the bottom of the pool and can even squat down even further to push off. So I have a whole speech on that. Is sometimes you got to go all the way to the bottom to be able to get the energy to get you to the top. And I say this to my kids a lot of times, is that why do you think on, sprinters, why do they have starting blocks? Because you need something to push off on. You don't ever see a sprinter in the Olympics in 100 meter, 200 meter, get down there. It doesn't happen. It's because we all need to figure out a way to use, whether it's pushing off from the bottom of our pool, whether it's from the starting block, to use those tough times that are immovable, to use it to our advantage. That's how you create force. Basically, you push off from an object that won't move. And so when we face our problems, I constantly I told myself that last year so many times, that for me to help, propel the Big Ten Conference forward, to protect our history, take care of our current people, but really to project forward, is that we needed to use this time. And so I'm fortunate of what we went through. I'm fortunate for the criticism that I received personally in our conference, because what does that do? Either that's going to tear you apart, and if you're able to survive it, you turn that survival into the thriving, which we did. And so now I feel so strong about the relationship that we built internally with our chancellors and presidents, our athletic directors, our coaches, our student athletes, the families, our faculty athletic reps, our senior women administrators. We learned a lot. And so I've said it before, in a normal year, if I had come into the Big Ten Conference and it had a normal year, it would have taken me probably 10 years to go through what we went through in 12 months, as far as relationships, as far as challenges, as far as learning and growing. And back to my accident, back to that body cast, there were days that I literally almost lost my mind in my body cast, because one of the things that my parents didn't account for is I was growing. I was an adult. And so the cast would get tighter. It was uncomfortable. So what it became down to is just me, from a mental standpoint, having to really work through it. And that's what last year was about. And so I'm grateful for what happened. I really am, because I feel like I was able to take 10 years of experience and relationships, really compress it into 12 months. And it was interesting. And you forget about some of these things. Christina Johnson, who I have the utmost respect for, the president of Ohio State University, we were on multiple conference calls, multiple Zoom calls. I did not see her in person until after the national championship game, when she was coming from the locker room and I was going to the locker room. And it hit me then, this is the first time that I've seen her in person. And we've been working together. There's still people right now at the Big Ten who I've hired since I've been there that I've never seen in person. Wow. And so I said, if the good Lord can take that environment, you know, and to allow us not only to survive, but to thrive and run a conference that spans across 11 different states with 14 of the best schools in the world, to deal with all of the political environments in a political year, in a global pandemic, with issues, with social justice issues that we're dealing with. And when I say my prayers in the morning, we have 10,000 student athletes in the Big Ten, 350 head coaches, 1,100 assistant coaches. And so I just think of the magnitude, and our office is still closed. And we have people from Los Angeles to New York City working at home, and we're still able to produce the products that we're doing with partners like the Big Ten Network and Fox and CBS and ESPN, and to have 3 teams in the top 5 in men's basketball or women's basketball doing well. Hockey, we got people setting records, a team in the national championship in football, a Rhodes Scholar, you know, in a global pandemic. So I think we just as a people need to provide each other with grace, have a little more gratitude, and to say, if we were able to do it over this last year, let's just make sure we remember that when we're back to whatever the new normal is, to have that same creativity and grit and moxie as we go forward. So I just think this entire time period has really been a blessing for us as a conference.
During your first year, you created the Equality Coalition, and the creating of that positive energy. You said 10,000 student athletes, and all of whom you had registered to vote this year. What kind of energy do you want to see from that Equality Coalition, and how do you feel that the coalition has been accepted by the conference?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in people are judged literally by their fruit, not by the tree. And so for me, if now over the next couple of years, people who work in the conference, people that I hire, if they're not conference commissioners or athletic directors or go on to do other things that they aspire to do, I think that's not good leadership on my part. And so for our student athletes, if they come to a Big Ten school and all they can talk about is that their athletic experiences or that they got a degree, those are great. But I believe that those are part of just, you know, that's like having a steering wheel in a car. If you come as a student athlete to a Big Ten school, yes, you should have a good athletic experience. Yes, you should graduate. But where we as a conference can be different, to be unique, is the fact when they walk out of there, that if our conference office has worked with our schools to help challenge our students to read books that they ordinarily may not have read, that they came in unregistered to vote and left not only registered to vote, but understanding what it means to vote. And now they understand our Big Ten pioneers. I mean, look at what we're doing from Black History Month, to understand who George Talafaro is, to really understand what that means, what these people stand for, and the sacrifice associated with it. And that when they travel, that they not only say, oh yeah, we're going to play, you know, XYZ Big Ten school, that they say, oh, you know, we're going to be in playing Rutgers University. You know what? We should go look at the Paul Robeson statue and learn and understand that. So I just feel like I have a responsibility and a duty, the same way that I raise my 2 children, the same way that I care about them and love them, the things that I want them to understand about life, that our student athletes feel that same way, that they're come out of our schools financially highly educated and literate. They're registered to vote. They're comfortable at talking about mental health and wellness, all of these holistic items. And I think if we take care of our people, take care of these things that a lot of people aren't comfortable in talking about, the wins and the graduation rates, all those things will be there. We'll win championships, we'll have Rhodes Scholars, because we took care of the people. So I will continually make sure that we put our student athletes, our coaches, anyone in the Big Ten family, that we put them first. and all the other things that come along with them, as we call them, these accoutrements that come along, and the trophies and the championships and the retired jerseys and all those different things that will come along with it. But the best thing that we can do, because the people that we all remember most in our lives are those people who took time for us as people first, not as objects, but as people first, to make sure that they invested in us. Because when you invest in a person, you have no idea what's going to happen. And I share this story, and I lead off in my book with this, that we had a young intern who's actually, his name is JT Baker. He's a student athlete at Cornell University now. He'll be graduating this year, but he was interning with me one summer at the Vikings. And I remember I was sharing with him, and others, that I was looking for some apple seeds, because I had heard a sermon about, how apple seeds, if you plant them, they grow and they germinate. So I wanted to make sure I got a little glass vial to put them on all my desks, all the conference table, to remind me. So I had mentioned it to a couple people. Came back to me and said, you know what, they don't really make apple seeds anymore. I couldn't find any more. We went to this store and that store. And I was thinking, I got to find some apple seeds. And then one day he walked in my office with a bag of about 100 apple seeds. And I said, where did you get these from? He said, a batch of apples. And what he did, he said, I went and bought, I heard you asking people to do it. And what I did, I went to the store, I bought apples, I cut open the apples, and I got out the apple seeds. So many times we look for things that are prepackaged and pre-made, and sometimes they're right there. And by doing that, he said, then it allowed my mom to make a couple apple pies. We made some apple cider. And I share that story with you, is what we have to continually do as a conference, is really go to the apple to get the seeds, and not try to go find someplace who puts them together for us. And that's what I want to do as commissioner of this conference. I'm not doing this for notoriety or anything. I'm doing this because I care about our student athletes. I care about these wonderful institutions. I feel the good Lord put me on this earth to share our stories, to challenge people, to be calm, but to be tough, to be a leader, to take us into a whole nother direction from a business standpoint. And then hopefully, however many days I spend here, that people will be able to look and say that, you know what, he brought a whole different level of kind of understanding and appreciation to what it means to be a conference commissioner. And because one of the first things that I did, I asked our branding people, I said, I really want to hang the pictures of the former commissioners on my wall. And one thing still to this day that I'm still amazed by is that there were only 5 people since 1895 who've held the officer of commissioner in the Big Ten Conference. I'm still amazed by that. And so when I think about from that first meeting at the Palmer House, and John Griffith and Tug Wilson, William Reed, Wayne Duke, Jim Delaney, and Kevin Warren, when I think about that since 1895, that's what really, that's one of those mysteries of the universe, I call them. And so I asked our branding folks, please find those 5 portraits. They have them hung on my wall. That's the first thing I see when I walk into my office of the Big Ten, when I come in, and that's the last thing I see when I go home. And one of the things I noticed, they're 5 white men, but what I notice even more so than that is that it provides me with hope for the future. And it provides me that if someone like myself, who grew up in a household with 2 teachers, who didn't grow up with a lot of financial resources, but they were disciplined, they were hardworking, they showed us love, they showed us belief, that there is unlimited capabilities for what our student athletes can be. And I've said it before, that one of our student athletes on this Equality Coalition will be president of the United States. And I believe that. I really believe that. And so that's why I'm energized, I'm happy, I'm grateful every single day that I get a chance to do the very best I possibly can to work with so many great people to lead this incredible conference.
Well, Commissioner, we're very thankful that you had a few minutes to talk to us about all of this. There's so many things that we really could have and wanted to ask you on top of what we discussed today. I'm sure walking down that hallway, seeing those portraits at the end of your day, I'm sure that is very rewarding. It's just a visual for the rest of us to really feel rewarded about, especially considering this is a project about pioneers, Jesse Owens, yourself, George Talaferro, C. Vivian Stringer, Paul Robeson, all these names. Commissioner Warren, again, thank you very much for your time. I know Christy and I both appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate both of you all. And I just want to tell you that the work that you all do I appreciate it. I mean, you really do it because you do it with passion. And I'm always so encouraged every time I can turn on the television and then see you doing what you do best. So keep doing what you're doing and always treat it like every interview, because there will be a last interview, but you never know when that happens. So treat everyone like it's your last and keep doing what you're doing. And I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone in the Big Ten for your sacrifice and dedication. So have a beautiful day. God bless you all. And I'm always here for you.
Thank you, sir. And I just wanted to say, you're the first African-American man to do a lot of things along your journey, but you are definitely not the last. And I certainly just want to thank you for your time today. And you have so many wise things to say that we will continue to carry forward as parents, as coaches, and as people who are trying to do right in the world.
Thank you so much. All right. Good to see you all.